You're listening to Consulting Logistics presented. Why am I even doing this? We actually had the OG for the 100th episode. Tim, hit him with it.
You're listening to Consulting Logistics presented by Aborn and Company. I'm Dooner, the original founder of this show, here with Kyle, who has taken up the mantle. I mean, I gotta say, what's really cool about talking to you is I only did like 30 of these episodes before leaving for FreightWaves, and now you're recording episode 100, and that's a big credit to you. You did 70% of the work.
Oh, no way. You know for a fact, as a producer yourself, most of the work comes at the beginning. So I could not thank you enough for everything you set up. And the audience definitely still goes back to your episodes and talks to me about them all the time, dude.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good time. And, I know we'll definitely get into sort of the lineage and everything, but I owe a great debt of gratitude to Steve Aborn. I know he's going to join us later, but he really gave me a lifeline in podcasting. When we get into the story about it, you'll kind of hear, but all of this almost never happened. But I'm glad that because of Steve, in a lot of ways, it actually did.
You know what? Why don't we bring Steve on right now? So Steve, you should be able to join. How's it going, Steve?
Good. Welcome, Tim. It's great to see you.
Yeah, he's giving me credit for this, but I got to say, there was a point in time when you contacted me. I lost my job in the industry in 2016 when my wife was pregnant with our second kid. And I'd always wanted to launch this podcast idea. We both had a mutual friend who knew you. We started this show called The Shipping Pod. You caught wind of it. I did it for a few months, but the thing is, I didn't have a job, right? So I needed to make some money. And around July of, I think it was 2017, you kind of extended a lifeline and you were like, well, what do you think about writing some blogs and maybe, freelancing the podcast for Aborn? And that's kind of how this all started. Because Steve, at the same time, when I was interviewing with some of these companies, like the DSVs and the Blue Grace of the world, they were like, we'll give you a job, but you got to lose the podcast. And there was almost a really tough decision there. One, I'm sure we're all glad that I didn't make.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the reasons I picked up the mantle for podcasting was to sort of have that living resume so I could get a job with someone like you or someone like FreightWaves, but also to push forward the medium because there was just such a wide opening in this space where the only podcast you'd really hear prior to the shipping pod was like webinars that were converted to audio, and they were just really dry and really boring and didn't have that conversational flavor and give and take that podcasts have.
Yeah, totally. And I remember listening to you and Ryan Dooley, who you were talking about. It was you and Ryan just kind of talking about, the industry and some of the conferences up here in the Northeast. And, one of the things that resonated with me was just how you guys were talking about, there's not a lot of young people and there's not a lot of energy in transportation and logistics. And I don't think there was. Like now it feels like there's a million startups and there's unicorns and there's all this excitement that's going on in the industry, whether it's the electric trucks, whatever it is, right? But like at the time, the VC investment wasn't there. It did feel kind of inaccessible and stodgy. It's always been a little bit of a hard industry to understand. So the ability to kind of communicate and draw in that younger audience, I thought it was way more powerful than something like a 500-word blog on freight accruals or something like that. It seemed like a really good fit, and it seemed like a really good avenue for us to kind of communicate to who we want to communicate to, which is kind of the data-driven, strategic type of thinkers in logistics and transportation.
I think that's where the other big need came in too, was just to have that ability, because we knew we had to educate a market, right? I knew I did from talking to people, especially in the Northeast, where it was kind of stodgy, kind of an older crowd who would always say that mantra of, oh, it's all about relationships, as if somehow companies that manage data don't have people behind them making those decisions as well. And it was just such a, I think we both kind of had a battle cry around it. And we're like, look, and the cool thing is that now, like we're doing all these virtual events at FreightWaves. And this year I noticed a big shift in how people are talking about data and technology. And it's not about trying to sell them on data or technology. Now it's about how do we become better collaborative partners? And those are the conversations you want to have as an industry matures.
Yeah, definitely. No. And what better place to have than podcasting, right? I mean, it was the cost to entry was so low and it felt like the upside was so high. And I think the other thing that kind of struck me thinking about it was, your work ethic and the entrepreneurial spirit that you had to just go out and start your own podcast and stick to a schedule and produce it. And, I mean, that really resonated with me as kind of in a similar situation where you're trying to bootstrap something and get it going and get it to the market. Right. So it was like, okay, a little bit of kindred spirits here. Let's put this together. Let's make a partnership, and let's go tell our story.
Now, talk about for both of you. So, I mean, as we talk about, especially things are easier right now. It's easier more than ever to start creating. It's something I think Tim, like all of us, kind of really believe. I think we get mad at people who are like, "How do I get started? How do I get started?" I'm like, "You got a smartphone. You can get a microphone. I mean, this setup, Tim, you can speak." Is cheap. Talk a little bit about starting off. How was it? What kind of research did you do? How did you get started? Like you were doing it all on your own. What was it like when you had quote unquote a little bit of company money behind you?
Well, I think one of the value that I've always brought to podcasting is my ability to work alone and to work really, really efficiently and cheaply. And one of it is because, like Steve mentioned, we're kindred spirits, but like I felt very passionate about podcasting as a medium and eventually getting paid full time to be a podcaster. I didn't know FreightWaves would even happen. That happened from this show. I interviewed someone on it, and then that just turned into a job, and it was just a natural extension of what I kind of felt I needed to do at the time. But starting out, like I mentioned, I lost that job. My wife, we just had our second kid. I had some demons to deal with. I went into an inpatient rehab program to deal with alcoholism and depression, and I got that kind of all cleared out, and I've been sober since and relatively happy since. Those things are always there, but then it gave the opportunity to really sort of focus on what I want to do with podcasting. But I had no money. So on Amazon, I bought like a $15 Chinese condenser mic. I bought the same exact board you're using right now, which is a like $90 board, but it has a USB out, so I could buy a cheap computer for $200.
Oh yeah, it's perfect. Yeah. It's
into that. Yeah, and then you have a better mic than I started out with. I had that $15 condenser mic, but you know what? It doesn't matter. You just got to start talking, and you got to get through. You got to get through those few bad episodes, right? And the good thing is no one's listening at first anyway. So you got like 15, 20 listeners. Don't worry too much about it. Get started. But I'm sure you guys have noticed shows like Consulting Logistics, what we're doing at FreightWaves, have been highly influential, especially during this pandemic. There are so many people in logistics now, just individuals, even outside of their companies, that are doing like LinkedIn live feeds, doing their own shows. There's so many of them now. It's crazy how big that scene has just blown up in the past 6 months.
Oh, that seems ridiculous right now. But I think one of the cool things, and you can definitely speak to it, I can definitely speak to it, is we got a ton of emails. I mean, I get emails to this day of people being like, "Hey, I'm new to logistics. Your podcast is great. It helps me kind of learn about this industry." And it was something like, even when I was interviewing with Steve, I went to Consulting Logistics. I was listening to what you were putting out. I'm like, okay, I'm learning more and more about this type of stuff. It was definitely very interesting. But at the end of the day, like you said, the equipment isn't hard. Like it's all right there. You can read online. It's something that's very simple to kind of figure out and kind of go from there. But yeah, the first couple episodes sucked. Steve can probably laugh because for me, I started in July. And I was like, I don't know, Steve, I really don't want to I got to learn this industry. I thought I would understand it. I got in here. I was like, what the hell did I just join? And I was like, I need to learn before I'm going to talk on a microphone and interview people. And he's like, just talk to me then. He's like, we can talk together. And it took me a couple months to be able to feel comfortable enough to bring someone on that wasn't in the Aborn kind of in the sphere of what we talk about. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is just go. Like you're going to get comfortable as long as you get the reps and as long as you start going. You just can't sit there and be like, I don't know. Like, I'm just not ready. I'm not ready.
You're not going to find the boundaries if you don't test them. And even when I was a bit more seasoned going over to FreightWaves, when you get there, it's still like, what can I say and do underneath the umbrella? Because you're still employed by somebody. You are with Aborn. I'm with FreightWaves. But when I was with Aborn, you have to still be the voice and the dialogue of the company, especially from podcasts. So I've always been sort of very, very mindful of that and always try to keep as in tune as possible in what the company I'm working for is doing, so I can help be that bulletin board. I mean, then you can bring in your own stuff as well, and you can cultivate it however you like. But ultimately, you want to create that audience. You want to be a voice for them, and you also want to get your company's message out there the right way, especially in this sort of B2B space that we're making. Now, I mean, at FreightWaves, we're definitely trying to make this as mainstream as possible and bring in as wide an audience as possible. There's definitely a thesis there. And that started all the way back when I first started podcasting and didn't have that job, because I'm like, I can use this podcast as almost a resume, right? I can talk about what I know, which is 14 years of experience in logistics, and I can put that to tape and, do some how-tos, break down some of the news. Ryan was there, but it wasn't without challenges. Dooley pieced out after like 9 episodes. It wasn't long that he was like, you know what, I'm too busy with my other stuff. And now, he's still doing sales or whatever he's doing. I'm going to catch up with Ryan. I haven't talked to him in a while. I'm not sure what he is up to. But I mean, maybe it was a good move too, because at that point, I really needed someone to believe in the dream, even if that was just me, because like you mentioned, those beginning stages, it's tough. I had lost audio before, I lost guests. It's very hard to book people when nobody knows who you are there. And especially when podcasting hadn't really been matured in the space. But I mean, ultimately it did work. And I think that's the power of content marketing.
Steve, talk a little bit what you thought. I mean, especially as you started off, it is something, you were a listener, but I'm sure you were like the rest of us. You listened to Serial, you listened to maybe one or two sports podcasts, most likely. You probably listened to some Notre Dame podcasts to see if they mentioned your name. Harvard football podcast. But what was it like? Oh, there's a Harvard football podcast. I guarantee it. But what was it like for you? What did you think? Kind of how was that first experience with Tim? And then with me too. I mean, Tim left and you kind of still wanted to do podcasts. What did you think kind of as the owner of this sort of this production for your company?
Yeah, I think I recognize for me, I kind of connect with storytelling, like whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a movie, like having the ability to tell that story in kind of a long form way always helps me connect the dots. And I feel like I understand things better. So, I think with Tim, I think Tim, you probably second this, but like one thing is you never know who's listening, right? I remember we went on like a January snowy night. We went over to Cambridge to go to MIT, right? And we were kind of recruiting. We're trying to find people to partner with. We're both kind of curious in the industry, and they were doing their transportation and logistics labs were doing presentations on what they found were in the industry. So we headed over, and Tim, you said you started in July, so it's probably like 6 months in, right? Yeah. And it was a snowy kind of crappy night out, and we start to saying like, hey, we're from Aborn, like what's your name, to these kids who were in school. And there were 2 or 3 separate kids that we were talking to who were like, I know exactly who you are. And they had been in finance and wanted to transition into transportation, or they had been in school and they took a job. And so, for me to have those companies, especially at a school like that with like, the MIT Transportation and Logistics Lab from a recruiting perspective, like who else do we want? And to have numerous kids in that space, know our brand and know our name because of the podcast, that's when it started. I always believed in it, but I think just like little stories like that where, you really start to understand the value, and you start to understand that, it's pretty profound. And I think Kyle, you've been great with the podcast, but also, we've been able to do some more video, right? And like we're recruiting, you mentioned at the beginning, we're growing, we're hiring. When I get on these interviews, I tell you 90+% of the interviews, somebody's going to bring up YouTube. Somebody's going to bring up the podcast. Somebody's going to bring up this clip that they saw on social, and they get to experience part of our culture. Right. And so if at nothing else, they understand, who we are, what we talk about, how we talk, how we want to present ourselves. And that's a hugely powerful recruiting tool. And I think, it also has been hugely powerful kind of on the sales and marketing side. Just being able to have that story and have that voice, it's really powerful. I think the last thing is it's good practice, right? Like, we've kind of, whether it's Chris Peckham, who's been with you, Jill Clifford's been on the podcast and on videos a million times, like other people within our organization. I think about the roundtable that we did during COVID that was, very, very widely attended. We were getting 50, 60, 70 people in these roundtables at the beginning, which is, was great for us. But, our ability to go on camera and communicate and speak to an audience, we did a great job with that. And I think it's because we got the reps in, right? Like you get your reps in, you get your practice in, you're used to speaking in front of audiences, and, whether it's in front of a microphone or with a headset, whatever it is, but it allows you to be confident. It's just part of what you do. So, I think it helps us very, very broadly as an organization.
Yeah, you bring up some great points there, starting at the last one, which is just in terms of like getting your story straight. How does my messaging sound, especially from front-facing people within your organization by having them on the show? They have an opportunity to reach people via audio, but it also refines their ability to pitch and present in front of people, because explaining something is a lot harder than reading and writing something. When you're reading and writing, you have a lot of time to be deliberate. When you actually have to talk, though, there's no edit button, especially on a live show. You've got to get that information out there, and you've got to do it in the best way possible. And having to speak sort of to a moderator or to a host of a show is actually really good training for realizing how to speak to a client and answer questions that they may be asking of you, especially challenging ones. The other one's recruiting and branding. And like you said, being able to get your voice out there and the tone of the company. Now, is this like the Borg, like a big IBM style institution, or is this a younger, more fun place? And that same delta between younger and older people, especially in the Boston area, which was sort of our experience, was sort of the opportunity that I think you and I saw with podcasting on a recruiting side is we got to be where the people who want to join this industry want to be. And part of the recruiting process is going to be going to YouTube. Part of their research on you, their background check is going to be going to YouTube or going to Apple Podcasts and just seeing what this company is all about.
It's not like just going to,
it's been great.
It's going to YouTube and like having a personality too. Like that's the thing. A lot of people are just like, I'm going to read this script. I know 5 series, but it's having that personality. It's so much fun to like listen to you, Tim, because you bring the energy. So when you're listening, especially logistics, it's not I don't think any of us are going to be surprised by this, but it's not that sexy, right? It's hard. No. You bring the sexy more or less when you talk, Tim.
But people are interesting. And right. I think that's a big mistake. And again, my like sort of thesis when starting out was to listen to podcasts like Serial and sports podcasts and how they personify the game. They personify that industry. And I think we've done a very bad job. We've done an okay job of making PowerPoints and talking about bullet points and reading scripted questions, but we had not done a good job of being like, you're a founder of a company. Like that's got to be an interesting story. You did something monumental, something most people won't do. You took this huge risk. You made this company. Tell me that story. Don't tell me a bunch of features. Like you got to make people like you, and you have to bring them into the conversation first. You have to compel them, and then you can maybe sell them your product a little bit. My heart dies a little bit whenever someone sends me scripted questions. And I'm always like, as the producer, I'm like, look, we just want bullets, especially to their PR people. And PR people always do this. Because what happens is, and you probably know this too, when they send you scripted questions and you read them, you can hear the person reading their answers back to you. And it's just like, this is bad radio, man.
Yeah. I try to do my trick with that, right? I got a couple of those that I've gotten here's the scripted stuff. I tried to serve it to them, but I try to say like, hey, I'm making this conversational. So I'll read that. And then it's the follow-up and I found this part interesting. But yeah, you get so many scripted questions. Speaking of that, how do you like going from a weekly podcast to like daily content? How's that transition been for you, Tim?
It's, I was able to scale it up at FreightWaves when I got there. They just had What the Truck. It was audio only. It was 1 day a week. And, but my goal there and what I was told by the founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, is I want you to build the largest podcast network in freight. So I did that by first just sort of getting a feel for the company, expanding What the Truck to 2 days, adding video, and just keep pushing the limits on that show and really kind of molding it into like the crazy variety show I've always really wanted to do. And one of the best things that happened is we started this other show called the Midday Market Update. So I had another show where I could sort of offload a lot of the serious stuff too, and then just make What the Truck even more of just like a wild playground. Like we have a show coming up. It'll probably air before this comes out, but Thomas Healy, CEO of Highly on America's Youngest Billionaire, is going to be on, but so is a guy whose donkey is really popular on trucking Twitter, and so is a gaming streamer, and so is US Bank talking about how carriers, if they don't get more income or finances, could be running out of money, and that kind of thing. And I love blending all of that stuff together and making just sort of a really compelling content, but it's a lot of work, and I still almost work on the audio side exclusively alone. I do all of the back-end production. I do all the shows. I upload every single one of the podcasts to there. We have a complete video team, since it seems like every podcast has video now, and they handle all that side of it. But, growing it and being big and breaking sort of our download records month after month and just seeing, I think the knowing this is working is actually seeing all these other shows pop up, because it means you're doing something really right, especially when they're sort of modeled in a frame that I laid a lot of the foundation for, and I don't necessarily feel comfortable saying that, but in a lot of ways I kind of did.
Yeah. With consulting logistics, that's kind of one of the coolest things is this truly is, it's been around there for a while. There's been some stuff, and it's funny because like we're reaching our 100th episode, but I'm seeing plenty of places they're like, we're on 400th, but it's a weekly podcast, right? It's going to be what it is. We can't do more, but it's very interesting, especially just being kind of one of those guys who spotted it in an industry. It's not like, oh, I spotted this little thing. It's like you realize an industry could use this content and you jumped on it early on. That's kind of, I know you got hard out. I know like as much as we got to move forward with this, talk about a little, I think we can all share some of our favorite kind of experiences, favorite moments, favorite kind of episodes within consulting logistics.
There's been a number of them, but I really like starting the 30 out of 30. It was a push that I really wanted to start doing that show. And it was just, again, part of that original idea of getting younger people and bringing in younger listeners. And because that's the highest volume of listeners there are in podcasting. So the more of those we can convert, the higher up the charts will go, the more other listeners will get. And, you always sort of want to hear, the best marketing you can hear in our business is if someone at a brokerage is listening to Consulting Logistics at a Table, or they mention it to their boss, or their boss mentions it to them. That sort of word of mouth builds. The super unique thing about podcasting is just how organic and how community built audience building is. It's a hell of a lot of work, and you can't just do it by getting a bunch of Google ads or something, because podcasting is so much based on retention. And you can have a really good guest and maybe spike, but in general, you kind of have to, the host itself kind of has to be the personality. The show has to be the brand. You can't rely just completely on guests. And knowing that the power of building the community is really, really important. But then the network effect of that is that you're building this community for your company as well. And then if you have other assets you can tether into that, you're really building this really strong ecosystem, this really strong level of trust within the community and with your show. And it's super cool.
Absolutely. And just piggybacking, I know the SCU stuff. Like, first of all, I know you're a wrestling guy. So did you pick SCU on purpose, or was that just like happened to be supply chain under 30? I know was it? Tell me, come on. I've always wondered it.
It just worked. It just looked good in Canva on a graphic. So I was like, we will run with that. You can acronymize it. You only have so many characters you can work with social media and stuff. So I'm like, I just want a short thing we could maybe hashtag, we could build out if we wanted to. And, we could use it as that recruiting aspect. I think the other ones was just like talking to Russ or having Steve on or having Jill on, especially in the early sort of nascent stages of the show as we were building out what it is, and having Chris Peckham on, he's like the Goodwill Hunting of freight, having those guys on and just sort of figuring out, and not only myself learning from you guys, but also creating this sort of identity for Aborn for an audience. And it was a really unique position to go in. And there was a big difference from doing it on the indie side. That was probably the biggest one, because when I was just doing the shipping pod, all I really had to worry about was personifying myself, right? And a guest or personifying Ryan and all of those kind of things. But then you join for a company and you have these sort of other values you have to extend into. And I think that was part of the coolest. Those are my favorite guests were the people like right under the walls within Aborn, because I think you're all pretty cool people over there.
Thanks. Steve, what about you? What was one fun fun experiences as you kind of experienced all of this?
Yeah, I think I remember, Tim, I think I was actually driving. So we did a couple of trips together, but the one that we went down to IBM in New York and we were like at the, it was like Tim and I in like McKesson and like Amerisourcebergen, and it was one of these early, like, blockchain was really hot, and they were talking about blockchain and sharing information. And because of Consulting Logistics, Tim and I got the invite, so there we were on IBM's campus in the middle of nowhere. But I remember the funny part was it was still pretty early in kind of our podcast. I remember I was driving down to New York and listening to the show, and Tim, you would do we were small, so now all the reader emails are real, but the reader emails, and it would be, it's Joe Bob and Revere, and Joe Bob wants to know about the chassis, and how are the chassis doing?
Don't give all his secrets away.
Right. I just remember just driving down the highway being like, what is going on? But either way, I think it's hysterical, and I'm having fun, and I'm sure the people listening are having fun too. And I know those emails aren't real.
Well, it was part of bringing questions in that you would hear online, like LinkedIn or whatever. So if they didn't ask them to you directly, it's sort of like, well, Joe Bob and Revere said this kind of thing to me, like, hey, snap ahead, where's my 40? Or whatever it was. But it was also like we had all these assets, right? And I remember I went to Inbound, that big Inbound HubSpot's marketing thing. And one of the guys there was talking about content flywheels. And he was like, look, if you're doing a blog, then you're doing this, then you're doing that, you're doing a huge disservice. And I took a lot away from that, because I was like, well, I'm the only marketing person at Aborn. I do write these blogs. We have to make these infographics. We have to make this stuff. What if I just started combining that stuff into the podcast to make one feed into the other and make those flywheels? So there'd be certain episodes where it would just be, recounting one of the blogs that we did in there, but doing it from like a podcast talking version. And then just to fill out that show, you'd have to also bring in some of those audience questions. But you're right. Also part of that was because we were small. It wasn't as easy to get guests at first. Totally. People were like, what do you mean a freight podcast? Like, give me a break. Or they just wouldn't even reply to you. Get ghosted.
Well, even the LinkedIn community, like you see it now, and there's conversations, and there's, like you were mentioning, people are posting things, people are, filming things. It seems like there's a concerted effort. There's other kind of channels that have developed, but like none of that existed.
Oh,
It was like, you and Sarah Barnes Humphrey was one of the OGs too. She was, right in the middle, and she's had a ton of success. But I just remember, it was very, very early, and it was a ton of fun.
it was. I remember that IBM thing too, because it was like the most IBM experience ever. We went into like a blockchain room, and it was all we weren't dressed like the other guys. They were all like in white shirts with the tie. It looked exactly as you would imagine, and they gave out a big like binder, and there was no graphics in the binder. It was just like coding language, and like they were projecting on the screen all this coding language. And we're like, we're ever going to sell blockchain, we got to make it look but it was for like that programmer audience too. So like those guys think that way, I think.
A little bit differently.
Yeah.
Totally.
Absolutely. So this has been super fun, guys. I think it's been a blast to talk about this type of stuff. And it's interesting where we're heading and everything. So I guess before we wrap up the 100th episode, Dooner, tell them where they can see you. If they don't know, I don't know how the hell they only listen to Consulting Logistics, seeing as we quote FreightWaves all the time. But tell them where they can catch up with you, bud.
Well, hold on a second. You tell me about your growth really quick here. Your growth. So you mentioned the beginning. You mentioned starting out. You're a little nervous. You just talked to Steve, but now you are nearing 100 episodes. You've been doing this for I think over a year now, right?
Oh, we went over a year in July. See, the problem is, the interesting thing, right? You love the energy, you love all that stuff. I've always been a behind the scenes guy. So I've always been a videographer, a producer, that type of someone who's kind of creating stuff behind the scenes. So when I walked in here, I was like, well, I'll just kind of take the reins to get it going. But really, like you said, my whole goal was to get people internally to start talking on camera more, talking video and stuff like that. I've known the power of video. I saw kind of podcasting blooming, kind of more and more people coming to it. But I was like, let me kind of start using video. I think people kind of still afraid of that. They don't like being on camera, as everyone knows. So I started kind of trying to make other people jump on. So if you see, a couple of the episodes have been hosted by Steve, been hosted by Jill. We have a marketing assistant now, Courtney, who I've had her try to get her to kind of start talking and stuff like that just for reps. But yeah, the difference with me and you is I don't like being in front of the camera. I think I'm the biggest fool. And I also didn't come from logistics. So I think I turned the episodes more into me truly learning. And that's kind of where I went from it. So like if I was reaching out or if I was talking to on a topic, it truly was me asking Steve, I'm like, hey, what's this about? He's like, well, let's talk on the show if you want to ask me this question. So like we started out with some of that stuff, and it kind of helped me really grow into being a production, like being more in front of the camera type of stuff. But yeah, the 100 episodes have been fun. And the craziest thing, like you say, is that community. Like, I really find it interesting when people are reaching out to me and sending LinkedIn and stuff. I'm like, wow, you listen to this? And they're like, yeah, I listen to it. And I think like, you're kind of like, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh man, you really got to listen a little bit more, because I'm definitely telling you, I don't know about this stuff and I'm trying to learn as I go. But it's also, I think, something Steve and I talk a lot about. It's probably been the best education I could have ever had. Like, I could have read everything in logistics, I could have done something, but when you're forced to talk to someone, and not forced, like we want to do this, but when you're in front of the camera talking to someone and you really got to think about what you're saying, it helped me learn about logistics so fast. There's been a couple of people coming in here that definitely, they're coming to me all of a sudden like, hey, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh wow, like I mean, we could talk about chargebacks if you want, but like, you don't know about chargebacks? I'm like, everyone knows about chargebacks, but half of it's just me reading year-old blogs and half of it's just me having to research and learn. But I think that's sort of what the podcast has been for me, is more of a personal thing. Like, it really has been a learning experience for me. It's been something I've been able to kind of reach out. I throw a little personality as much as I can in there, but I'm really learning, and it's kind of fun because I got now people from like Australia reaching out to me. We're getting all around the world being like, hey, I love your podcast. Let's talk. And then I try to be as helpful as possible. I mean, at the end of the day, I try to send the videos. I try to say, here's the file, use it how you want. I'm like, I'll help you too if you need me to edit this stuff. Like, let's get this out there. Because the more we can just get the name Consulting Logistics out there, the more people are going to, as you say, word of mouth. I mean, that's kind of the big thing, is word of mouth. But yeah, I mean, it's been super fun. I think the best episodes are the SCU. I mean, supply chain under 30, you're talking to like, hey, what got you into this? What did you think about this? Like, what was like technology like for you growing up? And all these kids are like, oh yeah, I grew up with technology. Like we were sharing a computer and all this stuff, because like I'm only 32 ish. Like I forget my age, but like it's funny now because I'm finding I'm the old guy, as Steve and I continue to find out.
Check his form, Steve, man.
That would help.
He's really 17.
We're finding out, like Steve and I continue to find out, we're like, oh, we're getting older, because like the new kids we're bringing in don't even get some of the references when we're talking about like Jordan and the Bulls. They're like, who are you? What do you mean, Kobe? We're like, yep, Kobe. But it's been super fun kind of talking about all that stuff and learning. I mean, honestly, I feel more, but it's interesting, right? I struggle with being out there as much. I kind of always kept the stuff separate, like my personal life and kind of what my business life was. So it's hard. Like, how do you get that community going is one of those interesting things for me, and like something I struggle with daily, but it also is interesting because it just genuinely starting to happen. I mean, more people are getting involved, more people kind of understand it. And like you say, they're searching for this stuff. So they're finding it. And it's kind of what makes consulting logistics fun for me. I would have probably been the scared guy at any conference, but because I'm doing this episode and more people are kind of coming and talking to me, I'm starting to talk a little bit more. I'm getting out of my shell a little bit, and I'm not as shy as I usually am. So it's been a blast to kind of produce this. Like it's been kind of life-changing for me.
Yeah, you can start freestyling on the half pipe a little bit. But Steve's like the Robert Kraft. He's like the good owner, the good GM. He puts the right people in the right positions, and I think he did a good job of having you come in there. And I think he recognized the fact that if you're hungry, you don't necessarily need to know all of this stuff. Like I came from the 3PL ocean freight side of the world. I had to learn a lot about trucking, and I did that by originally, before I ever podcast for Steve, I wrote about like 25 blogs, and I learned about all those things like chargebacks and all those things, doing the research by having to sort of write it out. Then I reinforced it by having to do shows and stuff about it. But a lot of that was just that education is great content for content marketing. And it was super cool. And once again, Steve, I can't really thank you enough. Again, if you didn't kind of step up in July, there were some other job offers. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay on freelance and I'm going to still doing the podcasting thing. But as I said earlier in the show, this may not have happened at that time. I had 2 kids. I really, really needed money at the time. And, I may have ended up back in a brokerage or something, and it would be a completely different story. And I'm glad that that's a story we don't have to tell.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you so much, Tim. You're always going to be a huge part of what we did here. I think, we're getting bigger, and you kind of think back to the old days when there was, again, 3, 4, 5 people in the office, just trying to grow the business. And I think the most enjoyable part for me, I'm competitive. I like to win. I like the growth. But I think the most enjoyable part for me is the people that you meet and the people that you get to work with, and the culture that you get to build. And it is such a big part of, your day to day, right? We're spending 8-10 hours a day at work. So, to be able to find people that are passionate, that are kind, that want to be able to, do the right thing. I mean, that's where the joy is in being, in having an organization. So, I say to both of you, thank you very much. It's super exciting that we have this podcast that's been out 100 episodes, and you guys were both huge parts of it. And I'm very happy I got to work with both of you.
Kyle, should I tell them where they can find my stuff?
You definitely should tell them where they can find their stuff, Tim. You got to get out of here.
Little applause.
You got a soundboard? What? How much did that cost? That's 2021 budget. I want a soundboard.
Okay. These are good. Road Procaster. Check them out. Look them up online. You get little triggers on here and everything.
Jeez, will do.
But if you want to find my stuff, my podcast now, they're over at FreightWaves. If you look on your podcast player, you look up Freightcast, there's every single FreightWaves show there, because we have so many now. I had to put them all in one feed. But the main shows that I do are What the Truck. That's Mondays and Fridays at noon Eastern time, live on FreightWaves, LinkedIn and Facebook, and then on video on demand on the FreightWaves TV app and on podcast. I also do that sales show, Put That Coffee Down, on Wednesdays. And on Saturdays, I do FreightWaves Radio on Sirius XM's Road Dog Trucking. So, Steve, I left you. Now I got to work 6 days a week. So I'm not really sure.
I don't know what happened there.
I work 8 if there was more, I guess.
Jeez. Well, Tim, next time you're up here, you're going to have to come into the office. We got Mortal Kombat Machine. We got Putter Ball. We got all these games now. Yeah. Steve, I've beat him every time in Mortal Kombat, so he doesn't play it anymore.
He's just a button masher. He just mashes.
I learned the codes. It's how Mortal Kombat works. Sorry, you lose. But
Street Fighter 2. That's a real. That's an elegant game.
Street Fighter. That's too smart for us. We're Mortal Kombat. We need blood. We need that. Like, finish him. But Tim, thanks so much for coming on, man. 100 episodes. I can't believe we did it together. You laid the foundation. You set everything up. Honestly, I don't know where I would have started without this, man. So I can't thank you enough for everything.
Cool, man. If anyone wants to network too, find me on LinkedIn, Timothy Dooner, or on Twitter at Timothy Dooner. That's DOONER. Guys, thanks again. Keep the lights on over at Consulting Logistics, kids.
Absolutely.
Bye,
See you guys.
Take it easy.
Bye. And that's our show. 100 episodes, folks, and we couldn't have done it without you. Tell us what your favorite episode was in the comments on this video, and then also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.